Well, hello. Welcome to the first of what I'm calling the in between. This is going to be our recordings in between the sermons. This series that we're doing on First Samuel, I really wanted us to get as much out of it as we could, but I realized too that it's going to be several weeks if we just do Sunday sermons, and not everything that we're going to look at is geared towards a Sunday sermon. So these will be kind of midweek studies, and so this is our first one, and we're going to look at First Samuel 10, 1 verses 27a. And so my goal through this is that we'll just kind of go through this verse by verse, and I'll just talk about what we're going to learn through here. So let's look at the first section here. All right. So this is from the Common English Bible, and the headline starts out, Samuel anoints Saul as king. So let's look at verse 1. Samuel took a small jar of oil and poured it over Saul's head and kissed him. The Lord hereby anoints you leader of his people Israel, Samuel said. You will rule the Lord's people and save them from the power of the enemies who surround them. And this will be the sign for you that the Lord has anointed you as leader of his very own possession. So as we learned in our sermon last Sunday, that Samuel anoints Saul as the first king of Israel. And notice what he says. This is what Samuel says to him after he anoints him. That you will rule the Lord's people and save them from the power of the enemies who surround them. All right, so obviously Saul was meant to be the protector of the people. God was going to use him to protect his people and save them from the enemies that surround them. See, when the people said that they wanted a king, their very description of what they wanted for a king was someone who was going to fight for them. So here we see Saul, again, being depicted as this person who would fight for them. And we're going to learn more about each of this and what takes place as we go. So let's look now from verse 2. When you leave me today, you will meet two men near Rachel's tomb at Zelzah on the border of Benjamin. They will tell you, the donkeys you went looking for have been found. Now your father has stopped thinking about the donkeys and is worried about you. He's asking, what should I do about my son? Then when you've gone on a bit farther, you will come to the oak at Tabor. 3 men are going to consult God at Bethel. We'll meet up with you there. 1 carrying 3 young goats, 1 carrying 3 loaves of bread, and 1 carrying. They will ask you how you're doing, and will offer you sacrificial bread, which you should accept. After that, you'll come to Gibeah Elohim, which is a Philistine fort. When you enter the town, you will encounter a group of prophets coming down from the shrine, preceded by harps, tambourines, flutes, and lyres. They will be caught up in a prophetic frenzy. Then the Lord's Spirit will come upon you, and you will be caught up in a prophetic frenzy right along with them. It will be like you've become a completely different person. Once these signs have happened to you, do whatever you would like to do, because God is with you. Then go down to Gilgal ahead of me. I'll come down to meet you and to offer entirely burnt offerings and to make well-being sacrifices. Wait 7 days until I get to you. Then I'll tell you what you should do next. All right, so there's a lot happening in just these few verses, and very, very detailed instructions that Samuel is giving to Saul. And maybe they seem a little strange too, like all these things that are happening. And so he mentions the donkeys first off. Well, remember, how did Saul come to meet Samuel? He was looking for lost donkeys. He was sent on an errand by his father to look for these lost donkeys. That's how he ends up meeting Samuel at the town where they met. And Samuel knew that Saul was coming to him. God had told him this earlier. And so the only reason that Saul ended up meeting Samuel and Samuel was able to anoint him as the first king of Israel was because he was searching for these lost donkeys. And then the first thing he says to Saul, Samuel says, is that he's supposed to meet these 3 men at the oak at Tabor. Now, oak trees were very rare in Israel because being the climate that it is, and so oak trees were seen as these holy places. And so to say we're going to meet at the oak tree at Tabor, Saul would have known exactly where that was, and it was meant as a holy place. Now, if I was to say, hey, let's meet at the oak tree here in Northwood or Manly, you probably have no idea what I was talking about because there's so many oak trees around. But this is referring to a very specific place. And then the 3 men that he's going to run into, one of them has 3 goats, another 3 loaves of bread, and another a jar of wine. And it says that they will offer you the sacrificial bread and you should accept that. So what does that mean, that sacrificial bread? Well, every Sabbath they would set out in the temple 12 loaves of bread, one representing each of the 12 tribes. And so they'd set them out every Sabbath, and they would stay before the presence of the Lord in the temple for 7 days. And then the next Sabbath, they'd replace those previous 12 loaves of bread with 12 new ones. And those 12 old ones, then the priests would take and they would eat that. This was consecrated bread. This is what it means by the sacrificial bread. So you could see why Saul might be a little leery to want to accept that, because it was special bread, but Samuel was saying that you should take that. And so it's interesting here that we have this bread, this sacrificial bread, this bread that's the show bread, or the bread of presence as it's known in other places, is our first look at what will become known as the Eucharist. When Jesus says later on, "This bread is my body given for you." This sets up the framework so they knew what that was talking about. And so this special bread is our first look at the Eucharist. And notice also someone is bringing with them a jar of wine. You can see the connection here. And then after Saul has this encounter with these three men, then he's to go on and he's going to meet up with these prophets. And they're going to be carrying some musical instruments, and it says that Saul will be caught up in this prophetic frenzy and become a completely different person. Well, what is that all about? Well, we'll read on and we'll see what that is here in the next section. So starting in verse 9. And just as Saul turned to leave Samuel's side, God gave him a different heart, and all these things happened that very same day. When Saul and the boy got to Gibeah, there was a group of prophets coming to meet him. God's Spirit came over Saul, and he was caught up in a prophetic frenzy right along with them. And when all the people who had known Saul saw him prophesying with the prophets, they said to each other, "What's happened to Kish's son? Is Saul also one of the prophets?" And one of the locals then asked, "And who is their leader?" And so it became a proverb, "Is Saul also one of the prophets?" When the prophetic frenzy was over, Saul went home. Saul's uncle said to him and to his young servant, "Where did you go?" "To look for the donkey," Saul replied, "but we couldn't find anything, and we went to Samuel." "Well, please tell me what Samuel told you," Saul's uncle said. "He reassured us that the donkeys had been found," Saul answered. But Saul didn't tell his uncle what Samuel had said about his kingship. And so the first thing we see in verse 9 is that all those things that took place that Samuel had mentioned to Saul happened that very same day. And it says that Saul was actually given a new heart. And so it reminds me of that song that we sing, "Change my heart, O God." See, God looks at the heart of the individual, and that's what God is looking for. God looks at the heart, and he wants that heart to be in line with him. God wants that heart of the king to be aligned with his heart. And then when Saul meets up with the prophets at Gibeah, it says that God's Spirit came upon Saul, and he was caught up in this prophetic frenzy right along with them. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Blues Brothers, but when I read this and I think about the prophetic frenzy, there's a scene when they go and visit this church where James Brown is the pastor, and they go in and it seems like a normal church service, but then the music starts up and people start playing tambourines and the band kind of picks up and James Brown gets into it, and then everyone gets in this crazy frenzy where they're singing and dancing and jumping up the air and doing twists and flips and jumps. I mean, it's this whole crazy scene. I encourage you to watch that. In fact, if you can probably find it on YouTube, just look for that scene from the Blues Brothers where they go to the church. But that's totally what I think of in this whole crazy scene, this prophetic frenzy. I imagine it to be something like this. Well, have you ever been caught up in the Spirit of God like this? Well, I have. And let me tell you, it is a changing experience. It is a life-changing experience. It's something you'll never experience any other time. And you come away from that totally transformed. And that's what happens. And there's these onlookers that see Saul and they're asking, is Saul also one of the prophets? And then it says that this becomes a proverb. It seems kind of odd, but this apparently was a saying. Well, it's no different. We have these crazy type of sayings in our language, like this one, for instance. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Or is that how it goes? Yeah, yeah. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Now, what the heck does that mean? I mean, I've heard people say that. I've heard that proverb, but I have no idea what that means. I actually had to look it up. And when you read what it says, it actually kind of makes sense. It's basically saying that it's better to hold on to what you have in your hand and be content with that than to let go and risk trying to gain something that is more. So in other words, be content with the things you have. Well, that makes sense. So this proverb here is Saul, also one of the prophets, and eventually became a saying and a proverb there. And actually it shows up later on when we get there, a few chapters later in 1 Samuel. So Saul is caught up in this frenzy, and it ends, and he runs into his uncle as soon as it's all done, as he heads home. And his uncle says, "Where did you go?" And Saul replies, "Well, we went to look for the lost donkeys, but we couldn't find them, and so we went to Samuel." He's like, "Oh, you went to Samuel? Well, tell me, what did Samuel say?" "Oh, he just reassured us that the donkeys had been found." Totally leaves out what had just happened, that he was anointed to be the next king, this whole prophetic frenzy thing that took place, and all these signs and stuff. Totally leaves all that out and just says, "Oh yeah, he just assured us that the donkeys were fine." And then let's look at the next section. And this is where Saul then becomes selected as king. So remember, Samuel said that he needed to wait 7 days, and then he would meet up with him again. So now the 7 days have passed, and they're meeting up together. So Samuel summoned the people of the Lord at Mizpah. He told the Israelites, "This is what the Lord God of Israel says. I brought Israel up out of Egypt, and I delivered you from the Egyptians' power and from the power of all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But today you've rejected your God, who saved you from all your troubles and difficulties by saying, 'No, appoint a king over us.' So now assemble yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and clans." Then Samuel brought all the Israelite tribes forward, and the tribes of Benjamin was selected. Next, Samuel brought the tribe of Benjamin forward by its families, and the family of Matri was selected. Samuel then brought the family of Matri forward, person by person, and Saul, Kish's son, was selected. But when they looked for him, he wasn't to be found. So they asked another question of the Lord, "Has the man come here yet?" And the Lord said, "Yes, he's hiding among the supplies." They ran and retrieved Saul from there, and when he stood up in the middle of the people, he was head and shoulders taller than anyone else. "Can you see the one the Lord has chosen?" Samuel asked all the people. "He has no equal among the people." And then the people shouted, "Long live the king!" Samuel then explained to the people how the monarchy should operate, and wrote in a scroll and placed it in the Lord's presence. Then Samuel sent every person back to their homes, and Saul also went back to his home in Gibeah. Along with him went courageous men whose hearts God had touched. But some despicable people said, "How can this man save us?" They despised Saul and didn't bring him gifts, but Saul didn't say anything. So quite a bit happening here as well. So the 7 days have passed, and it's time for Samuel to introduce Saul to the people as king. And the way that they would have done this, as you see, he's bringing all these people forward. He's bringing this group, and this group brought all the tribes, and then this one was selected. What they're doing is what was known as casting lots. We see that a lot throughout the Bible, where it talks about they casted lots. So it would be a device like dice that they would roll, and it came up with 3 different options. It was either a yes, or a no, or a question mark, meaning that they weren't sure. Something more needed to be considered. And so here we have them casting the lots, and so Benjamin, it says, was the tribe that was selected, and then it was from the family of Matri, and then the son of Kish. And so they got down to, hey, it's Kish's son, it's going to be Saul, and Samuel's ready to introduce him, but he's nowhere to be found. So again, they question the Lord, well, has he come here yet? Yes, and he's hiding among the supplies. So here's Saul's big opportunity to be revealed to the people that here is your new king, and the time has come, and they can't find him. In fact, he's out hiding behind the supplies. So I just imagine this scene of Samuel's like he's did all this, he's all ready, and they can't find him. So he goes, he grabs him and drags him out. And when they drag him out, notice it says that he was head and shoulders above everyone else. This was how Saul was initially described when we first met him a chapter before, head and shoulders above everyone else. He's supposed to be the king, the person who is to save his people from their enemies, to fight for them. You would think the biggest and the strongest would fit that bill. And so again, they say that here is the person. But as far as like someone who's meant to do this and be in leadership, not a good start. If you're ready to take the reins and you're off hiding behind the supplies, he seems awfully reluctant to be chosen as king. So Samuel grabs him, drags him out, introduces him to the people, and they shout, "Long live the king!" And so then Samuel writes down how the monarchy should operate on a scroll and puts that and gives that to the Lord's presence. And then he tells everyone to go back home. And then we have this group of courageous men that go home with Saul, but then we also have these doubters, these ones that were despicable as they're described here. Not everyone was impressed with Saul. As it says, they didn't bring him gifts, but Saul didn't say anything. So we already see this division taking place. Even before his kingdom even gets started, there's this division. There's the courageous men that followed Saul back to Gibeah, and then you have these contentious, despicable people that says that are the contractors. But Saul doesn't say anything. He just kind of lets it go. And we'll see how that plays out in the next chapter. So thank you for watching this, and I look forward to sharing more of these studies with you. God bless.